Did he have any that he admitted or found?
The traditional Muslim answer to that is, I'm going to use a stronger word, is that of sin. The traditional Muslim answer to that is that the prophets of God do not sin. And one of the reasons that we would say that is, for example, let's look at the Bible. In the Bible, it has it, for example, that, let me think of an example here, that Lot committed incest. That's in the Bible. Or that David arranged the murder of, arranged for a man to kind of lose his life in order to continue a relationship with the man's wife. You know? So these things, from a Muslim point of view, we see these things as examples of character assassination. And to be honest with you, to go directly to the question, we see these things as not true. And we apply it not just to Muhammad, but to all the previous prophets as well. We have such a high level of respect for them. So the Quran says that a prophet is never unfaithful to his covenant with God. Now, mistakes is a whole different ballgame. Now, I admit that there is differences in discussion about this among Muslim scholars. Some of them will say, they use the expression ma'soom, that the prophet and all the prophets actually were people who were basically perfect. But we do have instances in his life where we could not call it sin, but we could call it mistake. One of the examples that's given in the hadith literature is, well, actually there's several examples. One of the examples is that of the prophet was, preparing for a certain expedition, and so a man came to the prophet and says, "O Messenger of God," first of all, he set up in a certain place, like this is where we're going to be stationed. And so a man came to the prophet and says, "Messenger of God, have you been told? Did God tell you to set up here?" Basically, he says no. He says, "Well, a better place would be to go X, Y, Z." So they did God's suggestion. Another saying involves that of farming. I don't remember the whole thing, but basically the prophet made a suggestion that you should plant some crops here, and then they did it, and the crops died. I don't remember the whole story, but they came to him and he said, "Look, I'm just a man. I'm just a man." So in terms of sin, there's a difference between sin and mistake. So in terms of sin, we see that the way we see it that the prophet did not commit sins, but mistakes, whether they were of a character flaw or whether they were of a technical thing, like I say this is tea when in fact it's coffee. That is a different ballgame. Yes, sir.
Okay, one of the tenets of Western civilization is that there is a separation between religion and the state. And although a lot of Christians forget that, by the way. However, I've been led to believe that Muslims believe that Sharia law should be established in every state. And part of what you said, that Muhammad was the gift for all of mankind, and it's your obligation then to further that cause.
It's a good question. I'm glad you asked the question. First of all, yes, we believe that Muhammad was sent to all mankind. That he was a gift, a source of mercy to all mankind. That's true. But there is something very fundamental in Islam, and that is the freedom of choice, the freedom of conscience. Thus, the Quran says, if you allow me to quote in Arabic, it says, "La ikraha fid din." Why? قَدْ تَبَيَّنَ الرُّشْدُ مِنَ الْغِيِّ. He says that there is no such thing as compulsion in religious matters, because Why? Because proper guidance or truth, the right guidance, is already distinguishable from error. In other words, religion doesn't need to be forced down people's throats. So that's the first thing. The second thing about the separation of religion and state. I should say that the word Sharia in Arabic, it is more or less a path, like a water hole or path, Sharia, the word Sharia encompasses a great many things. As far as Muslim practice is concerned, it encompasses things like law, like how we do with in society, the criminal law and all that, economic law and all that. But it also encompasses something like how the Muslim offers his prayer, how the Muslim fasts, how the Muslim does his religious rituals, his religious worship. So the word Sharia encompasses a great many things. And one of the things that exists within the Islamic law is this dynamism. And what I mean by that is essentially that the way the Islamic precepts are given or practiced are going to vary from place to place. And I'll use two examples in the modern world, Iran and Saudi Arabia. Maybe I shouldn't use those examples in this realm. Iran and Saudi Arabia. Iran, both countries claim to be ruled by the Sharia, by the traditional Islamic law. But Saudi Arabia is ruled by a monarchy, by a royal family. And Iran, rather, they actually have elections. They have a prime minister. They have an elected parliament. It's very similar to the Western setup, to be honest with you. Both claim to be ruled by Islamic law. But both countries have different political cultures. Similarly, a Muslim can practice his or her religion in a way, even in a non-Muslim society. How else can I put this? I'm trying to think of a way to.
I can think of a case, perhaps. My understanding is that Sharia is fiqh. How it's interpreted through. It's like Roman Catholic canon law, through years of interpretation and figuring it out.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're a Christian in a Muslim country and you kill somebody, are you under Sharia law or are you under state or Christian law?
Okay, that's a good question. Now, traditionally, this is what happens in the days when Muslims were big empires and stuff like that. They had something which would be called dual legal systems. So, for example, a Christian could not be tried under Muslim law because that person was not a Muslim. They would refer it to the whatever legal system that they were used to. And in today's world, I'm going to give an example, and that is of a place you wouldn't even think, Malaysia. In Malaysia, you have it's a very slim Muslim majority. It's only like 60-65% Muslims. The rest are Hindu and Hindu and Buddhists and some Christians, not a lot of Christians. And so, in the stores, you know how you go to a gas station, you go to a grocery store, and they have a sign that says that you have to be 18 to buy cigarettes, right? In Malaysia, it's against the law for the Muslims, and all the Muslims are the same race, so you can tell right away. So in Malaysia, it's against the law for Muslims to drink alcohol. So they have a sign: you have to be 21 and non-Muslim to buy this alcohol. They have it in the, they have it on the sign, and in English, in the Malay language. So this is just a small example, maybe it's a silly one, but it's a small example of how traditionally Muslims did not seek to impose their way upon others. Rather, they allowed to exist, I guess you can call it accommodations for the other religious communities. And perhaps if you refine the question, maybe I can answer this.
Well, the devil is in the details. How it is always applied, and it's a nightmare.
Well, I mean, I admit that religion should influence how we govern ourselves. Religion should influence how we do our economics. Religion should influence how we do, our politics. Indeed, in the Bible, Jesus goes into the temple and he overturns the tables of the money changers. And even a reading of the New Testament was so that the message of Jesus had various, not just religious implications, but social implications and political implications. And so, but that doesn't mean, like from a Muslim perspective or even a Christian perspective, that doesn't mean that a sense of discrimination, a sense of imposing my way or the highway, it was to be done. So I hope I answered that question.
Just if the Muslims are minority, we have to follow the law of the land. This is a part of the Sharia law too.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Question though.
Yes, sir.
The final years of the Prophet's life was the greatest enrollment activity during his ministry. Can you explain in the final years what the relationship would have been between Muslims and the Jewish and Christian communities?
Good question. There were more Jews than there were Christians in Arabia in those days, particularly in Medina. In Medina, there were 2 or 3 Jewish tribes who were very strong. They had very strong involvement in the local politics and in the local economy. And so when the Prophet, may peace be upon him, when he arrived in Medina, one of the first things he did was to establish what today people call a constitution. There are a lot of books out there which talk about it, that there's an actual constitution that they set up in Medina. And this constitution guaranteed the religious freedoms of the Jews and even the pagans. And so, the Prophet worked in good faith with them. But what happened was that there was a sense of fear and a sense of jealousy about the growing power of Muhammad. And so the details are kind of long, but the point is that many of the Jewish leadership had arranged themselves in such a way with the enemy. It's like you're an American citizen. What was happening in this country? You're an American citizen, but you're spying for Cuba. You're spying for Iran. You're spying for Russia. They just arrested an American guy in Russia. They said he was spying there. So these types of things were things that could actually lead to death. And in some cases, it did lead to death, like individual Muslims and stuff like that. So it was because of those actions that made the relationship between Muhammad and the Jewish tribes to not be a good one. And this doesn't mean all the Jewish tribes, because there were still a few who kept to the treaties and agreements and stuff like that. They didn't plot with the enemy forces. But the point I want to establish here was that Muhammad was not anti-Jewish. I want to establish that point. He was not, he was not anti-Jewish. His actions with regards to them, the relationship deteriorated because of their own actions, which was based on their own insecurities and their own fears, and their own jealousies, and their own, I guess you can call it, political intrigue. Yes, ma'am.
I've studied Muhammad a little, and I've read most of the Quran. So I wanted to ask you if I could, an impression that I have to see if it's correct. From my understanding, Muhammad married a woman, I believe she was older than him. She was an astute businesswoman, and the reason that he was able to actually spend that much time getting the word from God is because she was a good support to him, and that he was really brokenhearted when she died. And then said women should be allowed to own property, if I remember right. I don't know my notes in front of me, but this is from that. That they should be able to own property, they should be allowed to be in the business place, and that type of thing. So I was wondering, is that accurate? Because that's pretty much what, in my study that I found. The other part of my question is, from my study, I think that actually the Quran talks more about Mary, the mother of Jesus, than the Bible does. And that there are a number of stories about Jesus in the Quran. I know that from reading that part. There's even stories about his kind of the lost years that the Bible doesn't talk about, the years of when he was being raised, because we pretty much only know about him going into Egypt and then coming back, and then he's older and kind of lost at the temple. But if you read the Quran, there are some stories, at least one that I remember off the top of my head, about birds and sparrows and things like that.
Wow.
So anyway, am I correct in that?
Yes, that's quite a lot. I couldn't even write it all down. Okay, essentially you're right. The Prophet's first wife was Khadijah. And she, according to tradition, was 15 years older than he was. And he stayed with her until she died. And I should mention at this point that yes, the Prophet was polygamous later on, but those are political and traditional marriages that solidified alliances. Those were those marriages before. It wasn't because he was just trying to be a playboy. And if you look at the stories, how can I put this nicely? Is not too many of his wives known to be beauty queens. Okay. So that's the first part. So yes, Khadijah was a very accomplished businesswoman, and how they met was that he was her employee. He was her employee. And she was impressed with his ethics and his work ethic and, his honesty and all those things. And she proposed marriage to him, even though she's older than him. And he accepted. And so there were moments where he would go to the mountains, for example, outside of Mecca. And it was there that we believe that he received the revelation, the word revelation of the Quran first started. And so he, even after her death, he maintained such a strong love for her. There are many traditions which talk about her. Like one example is that he had a young wife, Aisha actually, and he said something about Khadijah, and his wife said, is that you still think about that old toothless woman where God has given you so many wives? And he looked at her and he said something like, he says, she was the one who believed in me. She was the one who believed in me, and I will not stop loving her. This is what he said about Khadijah long after her death. Okay, so I said I couldn't keep it all, coherent. But the next thing was about Jesus and Mary. So in the Quran, there's an entire chapter 19, which is called Mary. And I admit there's no such chapter in the Christian Bible, but there's a whole chapter called after her, and it talks about a number of things, not just the Jesus and Mary story. Yes. So it also in the Quran, it has some miracles that are not recorded in the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Among them are, as you said, the birds, the birds, and some other things. And I admit that some Christian critics of Islam, they basically say that Muhammad copied this off of Gnosticism, because some of the Gnostic texts have things of that nature. But from our perspective, it is God telling you what really happened. From our perspective, God is telling you in the Quran what actually happened, and He doesn't go into the same details as other books. In Jesus' donkey into Jerusalem, that's not in the Quran. That's not important. Rather the Quran, it doesn't go into a lot of details. It gives you some narrative, really to emphasize points, not so much to give you a complete and total historical record of when he went to the bathroom and when he left the bathroom. So did I answer all of your questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
The Bible has many, many different versions. As we've tried to modernize them and make them more understandable, is that the same with the Quran? Or is there only one and that's it?
Good question. There is only one Quran that was revealed to the Prophet and that was recorded, and they put it in book form. And this is in Arabic, obviously. So all Muslims, they learn some portions, if not the whole Quran. There is a gentleman, I don't know if I should name him, but there's a gentleman who's with us who knows the whole Quran by heart. I don't know why he's shy to admit that. So this is a tradition that has existed very much early on. Now, there are different translations in English and in many other languages. And I suppose the difference is very simple. When you look at the NIV or the King James Version or New Amplified or any of the other translations of the Bible in English, you don't have the original text. I mean, the text is available to scholars, but in the original languages of the Bible. But it's not. You only have the translation. But the Quran, however, will have invariably. It will have. This is not the Quran, so I shouldn't use it. But it will have the Arabic text as well as the translation or the commentary in the language. So that means that anybody can verify, if the translation is being accurate or being respectful to the original text. So I hope that answered that question. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
I was curious about your congregation. Is it different than the one in Perrysburg? And is there like a regional hierarchy or an oversight of Islam, or are you all independent?
That's a good question. Traditionally, well, let me answer it directly. We are, we're pretty much all the same people in terms of everyone goes to different mosques, wherever it's convenient and stuff like that. We all have relations with one another, but there's no like hierarchy. He tells this tells us what to do. There might be some organizations that control mosques and things like that, but that doesn't exist in this area as far as I know with any of the Muslim communities here. The Muslim communities here are pretty independent. They do what they want, but they have relations. We all the mosques here, all the communities here have strong relations with one another. If you may recall, when our mosque opened, was it 3 or 4 years ago, I gave an interview in the newspaper in which I said, and you can look up on the internet, that every mosque gave us support. And it wasn't just verbal support. I mean support with the money. Every mosque here in town, gave significant support to the project. So, hope that answers that question.
In the wonderful golden afterlife, is there room for us Christians in your Muslim heaven? Do we get to share this according to your understanding?
That's a good question. That is a good question. And it is a tricky question because we talked about it a few minutes ago at lunch.
Leading the witness.
Leading the witness. Okay. I will say that to be honest, there are Muslims, like the average Muslim on the street, who will say that basically, only Muslims are going to go to heaven. I remember a friend of mine, we had a conversation about something about the Catholicism. He said, man, if I get to heaven, it will really suck if, Catholics are there. He made that kind of, he made that kind of comment. But this is what the Quran says, and it says it in these 3 places. And if you allow me, I'll give the quotation in Arabic. It says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَالَّذِينَ هَادُوا وَالنَّصَارَى وَالصَّابِئِينَ مَنْ آمَنَ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا فَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. I hope I quoted it correctly. I might be missing that one. Yeah, I quoted it correctly. This is the Quran memorizer. So, he's in a better position. So the Quran says in at least 3 places, it names religious communities. It names specifically Muslims. It names specifically Christians. It names specifically Jews. Who do what? They believe in God and the last day. And they have righteous conduct. God says that these people have nothing to worry about. That these people have no fear or reason to grieve. Now, I'll also add this to it. We have no idea who's going to go to heaven and who's going to hell. If we claim that, then we're claiming to be God. And none of us in here are God, are we? None of us can say that we're the all-knowing and all-seeing and all-hearing. So we can't really say who individually is going to go to heaven, who individually is going to go to hell. We can't say that. And I also share another thing from the Quran. The Quran says that it's a conversation between Moses and Pharaoh. It's in chapter 20, Surah Taha. And in the surah, in the conversation between Moses and Pharaoh, Pharaoh says, well, what happened to the people who came before? In other words, are these people in hell? He's asking Moses, are these people in hell? And Moses says, that knowledge is with my Lord in the record. My Lord is one who doesn't forget. My Lord is one who does not make mistakes. In other words, that's God's business. Because God controls that, not us. So that's God's business. And if you get to heaven, you're lucky you get there and you see somebody you don't like, take it up with God. And see how that conversation goes.
May there be peace on earth, right, between Muslim and Christian, not because he stops being a Muslim or I stop being a Christian, but because we both follow Moses. You said to love your neighbor as yourself, and Jesus affirms that, and Muhammad affirms that. So coexistence, it's our choice. Bless you. Thank you. And so if you ever have a question you need to ask an Imam, he has a blog.